Born as Giorgio Sodder in 1895 in Tulla, Sardinia, Italy, George Sodder immigrated to the United States at the age of 13. He arrived on the shores of America with an older brother, who, after clearing customs at Ellis Island, returned to Italy. For the rest of his life, George rarely spoke of the reasons behind his departure from his homeland, keeping those memories locked away. George initially found work on the railroads in Pennsylvania, where he carried water and supplies to laborers. After several years, he moved to Smithers, West Virginia, where he secured a position as a driver. With hard work and determination, he eventually started his own trucking company, first hauling fill dirt and later transporting coal from the region's mines. In 1922, George married Jenny Cipriani, the daughter of a storekeeper who had also immigrated from Italy in her childhood. The couple settled just outside Fayetteville in a 2-story timber frame house that became a loving home for their growing family. They were part of a thriving community of Italian immigrants, and by 1923, they welcomed their first of 10 children into the world. As George's business flourished, the Sodder family became well respected in the community, embodying the American dream. However, George was not one to shy away from expressing his strong opinions, which sometimes led to conflict. His outspoken opposition to the Italian dictator Benito Mussolini had particularly strained relationships within the immigrant community, resulting in heated arguments and lingering resentment. By 1942, the last of the Sodder children, Sylvia, was born, while their second oldest son, Joe, had left home to serve in the military during World War II. The world was changing rapidly, and Mussolini was deposed and executed the following year. However, the bitter feelings George had stirred up lingered on. In October of 1945, a seemingly innocent visit from a life insurance salesman took a dark turn. After being rebuffed, the salesman ominously warned George that his house would go up in smoke and your children are going to be destroyed, attributing this threat to George's dirty remarks about Mussolini. Another visitor claiming to seek work casually remarked about the potential danger of the house's fuse boxes, despite George having just had the house rewired. In the weeks leading up to Christmas that year, George's older sons noticed a strange car parked along the main highway, its occupants seemingly watching the younger Sodder children as they returned home from school. With tensions rising and ominous signs appearing, the stage was set for a tragedy that would forever alter the Sodder family's fate. On Christmas Eve 1945, the Sodder family gathered to celebrate a holiday filled with joy and laughter. Marion, the eldest daughter at 19, returned home from her job at a local dime store, bringing surprises for her younger sisters, Martha, age 12, Jenny, 8, and little Betty, just 5. The girls were thrilled with their new toys, begging their mother, Jenny, to let them stay up past their usual bedtime. At 10 p.m., Jenny agreed, but reminded the 2 oldest boys, 14-year-old Maurice and 9-year-old Louis, that they needed to take care of the cows and feed the chickens before they went to bed. Meanwhile, George, their father, and the 2 oldest sons, John, 22, and George Jr., 16, were already asleep after a long day of work. After settling her youngest daughter, Sylvia, who was just 3, upstairs, Jenny tucked her in and went to bed herself. At 12:30 a.m., Jenny was awakened by the ringing phone. A woman's voice, unfamiliar to her, asked for someone she didn't recognize, accompanied by the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses in the background. The call felt odd, and after hanging up, Jenny noticed the lights were still on and the curtains were drawn, a detail the children usually managed when they stayed up late. Assuming they had all gone to bed, she closed the curtains and returned to sleep. At 1 a.m., a loud bang jolted Jenny awake, followed by a rolling noise that echoed through the house. Dismissing it as nothing, she settled back into sleep. But soon after, she was awakened again, this time by the acrid smell of smoke. Jumping out of bed, she discovered flames engulfing the room, where George kept his office, centered around the telephone line and fuse box. In a panic, Jenny rushed to wake George, who quickly alerted their older sons. They all scrambled to escape the burning house, along with Marion and Sylvia. Frantically, they called for the other children who were asleep upstairs, but their cries went unanswered. The stairway was already engulfed in flames, blocking any chance of reaching the attic where the younger children slept. As chaos unfolded, Marion dashed to a neighbor's house to call the Fayetteville Fire Department, while a passing motorist also attempted to alert authorities. Yet, despite their efforts, help was slow to arrive, and the family's attempts to rescue the children proved fruitless. George, barefoot and desperate, tried to climb the outside wall and break open a window, but faced obstacles at every turn. The ladder was missing, the water barrel was frozen solid, and neither of his trucks would start, despite functioning perfectly just hours earlier. For 45 agonizing minutes, the 6 surviving Sodders could only watch helplessly as their home was consumed by flames. They believed their 5 children had perished in the blaze, a horrific reality they struggled to comprehend. The local fire department, overwhelmed by wartime manpower shortages, did not arrive until later that morning. Chief F.J. Morris later recounted that the slow response was compounded by his inability to drive the fire truck, causing further delays. When firefighters finally arrived, they could do little but sift through the ashes of the devastated home. By 10 a.m., Morris delivered the heart-wrenching news: no bones had been found, which would have been expected had the children been inside when the fire erupted. Some accounts suggested a few bone fragments were discovered, but withheld from the family. Despite the absence of evidence, Morris concluded that the children had died in the inferno, believing the fire had burned hot enough to incinerate their bodies completely. Not long after the fire, as the Sodder family began to rebuild their lives, they became increasingly skeptical of the official findings surrounding the tragic event. They questioned why, if the fire had been caused by an electrical issue, their Christmas lights had remained on during the early stages of the fire when the power should have gone out. This puzzling inconsistency led them to investigate further, uncovering more unsettling details. Their search for answers took a significant turn when they found the missing ladder that had been thought to be gone forever. It was located at the bottom of an embankment, a staggering 75 feet away from the house. This discovery raised further suspicions about the circumstances of that fateful night. A telephone repairman informed the Sodders that the phone line had not burned through during the fire, as they initially believed, but had been deliberately cut. This cut was made by someone who had managed to climb 14 feet up the pole and reach 2 feet away to do so, indicating a level of premeditation that shocked the family. Around the same time, a man had been seen stealing a block and tackle from the Sodder property. After being arrested, he admitted to the theft, but denied any involvement in the fire. Strangely, there was no record identifying this suspect, leaving the family to wonder why someone would cut utility lines to their house while committing a theft. Jenny Sodder expressed disbelief in Fire Chief Morris's assertion that all traces of the children's bodies had been completely consumed by the flames. In stark contrast, many household appliances were found recognizable in the ashes, along with fragments of the tin roof. She recalled a newspaper account of a similar fire that killed a family of 7, where skeletal remains were discovered. Determined to understand the science behind cremation, Jenny burned small piles of animal bones to observe the results, finding that none were completely consumed. A local crematorium employee confirmed her findings, stating that human bones remain even after being burned at 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit for 2 hours, far longer and hotter than the Sodder house fire could have been. The Sodders also questioned why their trucks had failed to start during the emergency. George suspected they had been tampered with, possibly by the same individual who had stolen the block and tackle and cut the phone line. However, one of George's sons-in-law suggested that the failure might have been due to the family's panic, flooding the engines in their haste to escape. Adding to the intrigue, the wrong number phone call that Jenny received shortly before the fire was scrutinized for potential connections to the tragedy. Investigators later traced the call back to a woman who confirmed it had indeed been a mistake, further complicating the narrative of what transpired that night. As the Sodders dug deeper, their investigation revealed inconsistencies and unanswered questions that only fueled their determination to uncover the truth about their children's fate. They refused to accept the official story, convinced that the mystery surrounding the fire and the disappearance of their children was far from over. As spring approached, the Sodder family honored their missing children by planting flowers in the soil where their home once stood, bulldozed to the ground by the devastating fire. Jenny tended to the flowers carefully for the rest of her life, each bloom a symbol of her enduring hope. However, as 1946 unfolded, further developments reinforced the family's belief that the children they were memorializing might still be alive somewhere. New evidence began to emerge, suggesting that the fire had not been an accident caused by an electrical fault, but had instead been deliberately set. A bus driver who passed through Fayetteville late on Christmas Eve reported seeing individuals throwing balls of fire at the house. This alarming account was bolstered when Sylvia, the youngest Sodder child, discovered a small, hard, dark green object in the brush nearby after the snow had melted. George recalled his wife's account of a loud thump on the roof just before the fire began and noted that the object resembled a pineapple bomb, or some type of incendiary device used in combat. The family claimed, contrary to the fire marshal's conclusion, that the fire had actually originated on the roof, but by then there was no way to prove it. The mystery deepened when witnesses began to come forward, claiming they had seen the missing Sodder children alive. One woman, watching the fire from the roadside, stated she saw some of the children peering out of a passing car while their home burned. Another woman at a rest stop between Fayetteville and Charleston said she served them breakfast the morning after the fire. She noted a car with Florida license plates parked nearby, adding another layer to the family's hope. In their quest for answers, the Sodders hired a private investigator named C.C. Tinsley from the nearby town of Gawley Bridge. Tinsley uncovered troubling information regarding the insurance salesman who had threatened George over his anti-Mussolini sentiments. This same salesman had been on the coroner's jury that ruled the fire an accident. Rumors began to circulate around Fayetteville that, despite telling the Sodders no remains had been found, Chief Morris had discovered a heart in the ashes and secretly buried it in a metal box. Morris eventually confessed this to a local minister who relayed the information to George. Determined to uncover the truth, George and Tinsley confronted Morris, who reluctantly agreed to reveal the location of the burial site. They dug up the metal box and took its contents to a local funeral director for examination. To their shock, the director confirmed that what they found inside was not human remains, but rather fresh beef liver, completely unscathed by fire. Further rumors suggested that Morris had planted the liver in the hopes that the Sodders would believe it was a piece of their children, providing them with a false sense of closure. The depths of this deception added to the family's anguish, fueling their relentless pursuit of the truth and their belief that their children might still be out there, waiting to be found. In the years that followed the tragedy, George Sodder remained relentless in his pursuit of the truth. One day he stumbled upon a magazine photo of a group of young ballet dancers in New York City. One of the girls bore an uncanny resemblance to his missing daughter, Betty. Driven by hope, he traveled all the way to the girl's school, only to have his repeated requests to see her denied. Desperate for assistance, George reached out to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, believing that his children's disappearance was a case of kidnapping. He penned letters to FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, who personally responded stating, "Although I would like to be of service, the matter related appears to be of local character and does not come within the investigative jurisdiction of this bureau." Hoover offered to direct agents to assist if local authorities requested help, but both the Fayetteville Police and Fire Departments declined to involve the FBI. By August 1949, George managed to convince pathologist Oscar Hunter from Washington, D.C., to oversee a new search of the fire site. the investigation turned up artifacts, including a dictionary that belonged to the children and some coins. However, the most startling discovery was several small bone fragments, which were determined to be human vertebrae. These bone fragments were sent to Marshall T. Newman, a specialist at the Smithsonian Institution, for analysis. Newman's report confirmed that the bones were lumbar vertebrae from a single individual, estimated to be between 16 and 22 years old at the time of death. This age range made it unlikely that the bones belonged to any of the missing Sodder children, as the oldest, Maurice, was only 14 at the time of the fire. Newman further noted that the bones showed no signs of exposure to flame, adding to the mystery surrounding their origin. He found it very strange that these were the only bones discovered, given that a house fire of such duration should have left full skeletons behind. The report concluded that the vertebrae likely came from the dirt George had used to bulldoze the site. Later, private investigator Tinsley purportedly confirmed that the bone fragments had originated from a cemetery in nearby Mount Hope, yet he could not explain how they ended up at the fire site. In September 1949, the Smithsonian returned the bone fragments to George, but their current whereabouts remain unknown. The investigation into the Sodder children's disappearance attracted national attention, prompting the West Virginia legislature to hold 2 hearings on the case in 1950. However, after these hearings, Governor Oki L. Pattison and State Police Superintendent W. E. Burchett informed the Sodders that the case was deemed hopeless and closed it at the state level. Although the FBI initially saw the case as a potential interstate kidnapping and pursued leads for 2 years, they eventually dropped it after coming up empty-handed. Despite the end of official investigations, the Sodder family refused to relinquish hope for their missing children. They printed flyers featuring pictures of the children and offered a $5,000 reward, later doubled, for any information that could lead to the resolution of their case, even for just one child. In 1952, they erected a billboard at the site of their burned home, as well as another along U.S. Route 60 near Ansted, spreading their message far and wide. This billboard would eventually become a landmark for travelers passing through Fayetteville on U.S. Route 19. The family's tireless efforts led to another reported sighting of the children after the fire. Ida Crutchfield, a woman who operated a hotel in Charleston, West Virginia, claimed to have seen the missing children about a week after the fire. According to her statement, the children had entered the hotel around midnight, accompanied by 2 men and 2 women who appeared to be of Italian extraction. When Crutchfield attempted to speak to the children, one of the men responded with hostility, speaking rapidly in Italian and silencing the group. They left the hotel early the next morning. However, investigators today regard her account as dubious, given that she only saw photos of the children 2 years after the fire and came forward 5 years later. George Sodder took matters into his own hands, personally following up on leads that surfaced. One woman from St. Louis, Missouri, claimed that Martha was being held in a convent there. A bar patron in Texas recounted overhearing 2 individuals making incriminating statements about a fire that occurred on Christmas Eve in West Virginia years prior. Yet none of these tips proved significant or fruitful. When George learned that a relative of Jenny's in Florida had children resembling his own, he insisted on verifying their identities before he would entertain the possibility. In 1967, George traveled to the Houston area to investigate another tip from a woman who wrote to the family, stating that Lewis had revealed his true identity to her after a night of heavy drinking. She believed that both Louis and Maurice were living somewhere in Texas. However, George and his son-in-law, Grover Paxton, were unable to meet with her. Police were able to help them locate the 2 men she had identified, but they denied being the missing Sodder sons. Paxton later recalled that doubts about their denials lingered in George's mind for the rest of his life. In the same year, another letter brought the Sodders what they believed was the most credible evidence that at least Louis was still alive. Jenny found a letter in the mail, postmarked from Central City, Kentucky, with no return address. Inside was a photograph of a young man, around 30 years old, whose features bore a striking resemblance to Louis, who would have been in his 30s had he survived. Written on the back were the words, "Louis Sodder, I love, brother Frankie Elu boys, a 90132 or 35. Hope surged within the family, prompting them to hire another private detective to investigate the source of the letter. However, the detective never reported back, and the Sodders were unable to locate him afterward. Regardless, the photograph was added to their billboard, though they chose to omit any details about Central City or the letter from public view, fearing that Louis might come to harm. An enlargement of the photo was prominently displayed over their fireplace. George expressed the frustration of their search in a 1968 interview with the Charleston Gazette-Mail, stating that the lack of information felt like hitting a rock wall. Despite the challenges, he remained resolute. "Time is running out for us, but we only want to know. If they did die in the fire, we want to be convinced. Otherwise, we want to know what happened to them." George passed away in 1969, but Jenny and her surviving children, except for John, who rarely spoke of the fire, continued to seek answers about their siblings' fates. After George's death, Jenny remained in the family home, adding fencing and extra rooms. She wore black in mourning and diligently tended the garden at the site of their former home until her death in 1989, when the family finally took down the weathered, worn billboard. The surviving Sodder children, along with their own families, continued to publicize the case and explore new leads. They, alongside older residents of Fayetteville, theorized that the Sicilian Mafia might have attempted to extort money from George, possibly taking the children after learning about a planned arson. There was speculation that the children could have been taken back to Italy. The family believed that if the children had survived and were aware of their parents' survival, they may have chosen to avoid contact to protect their family from potential danger. Sylvia Sodder Paxton, the youngest of the surviving siblings, passed away in 2021. She was in the house on the night of the fire and recalled that it was her earliest memory. "I was the last one of the kids to leave home," she told the Gazette-Mail in 2013, reflecting on her late-night conversations with her father about the mystery. Sylvia believed her siblings had survived and actively participated in efforts to find them and keep their story alive. Her daughter remarked in 2006 that Sylvia had promised her grandparents she wouldn't let the story die, vowing to do everything she could to uncover the truth. In the 21st century, the family's efforts expanded to include online forums such as websleuths.com, along with continued media coverage. This renewed interest has led some investigators to conclude that the children may have perished in the 1945 fire. Local author George Bragg, who wrote about the case in his 2012 book, West Virginia's Unsolved Murders, expressed that while logic suggests the children likely died in the fire, the case remains complex and shrouded in uncertainty. "You can't always go by logic," he noted, emphasizing the enduring mystery that continues to captivate and haunt the Sodder family. As time passed, the mystery of the Sodder children became more than just a family tragedy. It transformed into a haunting tale that echoed through generations. Despite exhaustive searches, countless leads, and the enduring hope of the Sodder family, the truth of what happened that fateful night on Christmas Eve remained elusive. In the decades that followed, the case sparked a national conversation about the safety of children and the potential for kidnapping. It served as a reminder of the fragility of family bonds and the lengths to which parents will go to protect their children. The Sodder family's plight has resonated with many, inspiring others to advocate for missing children and raising awareness about the importance of community vigilance. Though George and Jenny Sodder are no longer with us, their unwavering determination to uncover the truth continues to inspire. Their story is a testament to the human spirit's resilience in the face of unimaginable loss. Each year, new generations discover the mystery of the Sodder children, ensuring that their names and the quest for answers live on. To this day, the questions linger. Did the Sodder children survive that night? Are they living among us, unaware of their family's search for them? The mystery remains open, a chilling reminder that some stories are never truly resolved.